Welcome to WYSC, where we give you a quick peek at the day's top stories. I'm Julia Manchester, in for Jamal Simmons. A quick update. It's official. Former U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions is running for his old Senate seat in Alabama. And the trade war between the U.S. and China is de-escalating. Yesterday, both countries agreed to roll back some of the tariffs. On today's show, another billionaire is thinking about getting into the 2020 Democratic race. And Warren gets a new big-name endorsement. Boomers are keeping millennials and Gen X-ers from getting promoted, and this is why you should care. Former New York City mayor and billionaire businessman Michael Bloomberg is preparing to enter the presidential race. He's expected to file his paperwork sometime soon, designating himself as a candidate in at least one of the early deadline states. His spokesperson said Bloomberg has not yet made a final decision. Here to talk more about a potential run is Hill reporter Alex Gangitano. Alex, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Julia.
So what does this really mean? What was behind Michael Bloomberg's decision? What do we know about what went into this decision-making process?
So it's interesting. Michael Bloomberg is somebody who has been toying with running for president for years now, and I think within recent months has been bringing it up more and more with aides. Something that I think would be a reason for him is, as Vice President Joe Biden is kind of trailing in the polls a bit, this might be an open lane for moderates, and somebody like Mike Bloomberg might be able to take that spot to get the more moderate vote. Another thing, though, is that we're not sure how moderate candidates will wave in the progressive party when it comes to the primary. I mean, if he thinks he can beat Donald Trump, he has to get to the general election.
Absolutely. And we know that he's the second billionaire businessman to enter this race on the Democratic side. He's also faces Tom Steyer. But Tom Steyer, despite having all of this money for buying advertisements and such, he hasn't really made much of an impact. Talk to me more about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that Mike Bloomberg has more of the name recognition. Obviously, he has a media company with his name on it. He has his business. And so I think he might be able to fare better in the polls just because of that. Tom Steyer, I feel like, came in at a time when the landscape was there's a lot more people in it. It was a lot for the candidates and for voters to choose from. And so maybe now that it's really come down to perhaps a fight between Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, and Bernie Sanders, that Mike Bloomberg might be able to just focus on competing with those three.
Absolutely. And in terms of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren being the progressives in the race, you know, they've already raised quite a bit of money from small dollar donors. They very much presented themselves as candidates for the people en masse. So how does Michael Bloomberg try to relate to the average Democratic primary voter, but while at the same time being a billionaire businessman and having that status?
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how I don't think is planning on asking for money for his campaign. He's going to self-fund. And so maybe he can use that as, I'm trying to help the public here and I don't need anything in return. Another thing that Mike Bloomberg has become famous for is running a gun control advocacy group. And so I think if he can run on that, as this is something that matters to people regardless of where you live, regardless of your economic situation. A lot of parents can resonate with that. I think that's something that he can relate to voters on, as this is an issue that I really care about.
That'll be really interesting, given that Eric Swalwell and later on Beto O'Rourke very much ran on that issue of gun control. But moving to the general election, if Bloomberg were to face off against Donald Trump, I mean, it'll be two New York City billionaires facing each other. If that were to happen, and this is obviously a big if because Bloomberg hasn't even made a decision, but what does this say about American politics? I mean, President Trump campaigned on this idea that he wasn't necessarily an elitist. He was trying to connect with the blue-collar voter, called himself a blue-collar billionaire. What does that say, though? Does it send a message that to be in politics, you have to be a billionaire?
I mean, I could see that definitely being the message that people outside of DC and outside of New York take away from this. I think Michael Bloomberg's going to run on the fact that he is a DC outsider, but he's not necessarily an outsider when it comes to big money politics. I mean, in New York, he has a great reputation, and I think he has a better reputation than President Trump did in the city. He was a mayor that was very well regarded, and so I think that will help him kind of set himself apart from President Trump. And then something that I think is going to be difficult for President Trump is how much money Bloomberg has, especially in comparison. We keep seeing on Twitter and on TV the comparison of the numbers between Trump and Bloomberg, and I think that we've seen some Trump aides come out and say that that's not something that the president is too happy about.
Right. One final question. Michael Bloomberg has also been a very big environmental advocate and has committed a lot of resources to fighting climate change. How will that play with Democratic voters? This has clearly become an issue, and how will he be able to differentiate himself from the rest of the field who have also pledged to fight climate change?
I think because he's such a philanthropist, he'll be able to actually give tangible, hey, I spent this much money here, I traveled to these places, and I actually worked on combating climate change. But as we mentioned with the gun control issue, that was something that Eric Swalwell unsuccessfully ran on. And then we saw Jay Inslee unsuccessfully run on only climate change. So it will be interesting to see kind of the combination of two big issues that really matter to people for one candidate alone, as opposed to if he was just running on one of these issues.
All right, well, Alex, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
2020 presidential hopeful Elizabeth Warren has scored a few key endorsements from Black women this week. Massachusetts Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley publicly announced her support for Warren on Tuesday.
I'm Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, and I represent the Massachusetts 7th Congressional District, and I'm proud to endorse Elizabeth Warren for president.
She was the final member of the squad to endorse the presidential candidate, but the only one not to support another 2020 contender, Bernie Sanders. The squad still appears strong despite Presley's breaking with the ranks with her fellow progressives. And on Thursday, a group of more than 100 Black, female, and gender non-conforming activists also expressed their support for the Massachusetts senator's presidential bid. They praised Warren for her track record in activism and progressive agenda. This endorsement comes just as Warren made her first campaign stop in North Carolina, a key battleground state in the 2020 election. She visited NC-A&T, the largest historically Black college in the United States. There, she spoke to a lively crowd advocating for big picture policies like banning gerrymandering, M4A, free tuition, and breaking up big tech, among other issues. She also pledged $50 billion to HBCUs that would have come from a wealth tax. So why should you care? Many strategists believe Black women are the backbone of the Democratic Party. In 2016, 94% of Black women voted for Hillary Clinton, and according to a recent Essence survey, 95% plan to vote in the 2020 election. If Democrats want to win back the White House, the support of Black women voters is essential. Millennials and Gen X-ers want baby boomers to get out of the way at work. A new USA Today LinkedIn survey found that younger generations think the climb up the workforce ladder is getting harder, especially when it comes to middle and higher level positions. Baby boomers are putting off retirement, and according to this survey, 41% of millennials attributed the difficulty scaling upward in their fields to exactly that: boomers hanging on to their jobs. Older generations are living longer. Many of them were hit hard in the 2008 recession and have had to replenish lost wages and savings in the years since. As for the younger generations, instead of staying in one job and making their way up the chain, they're going from job to job, searching for professional growth. A LinkedIn career expert pointed out to USA Today that America's workforce is multi-generational. The youngest being Gen Zers, followed by Millennials, then Gen X-ers, and the oldest being the baby boomers. According to this survey, the youngest generation also make up the largest chunk of the workforce. But as several 30-somethings told USA Today, they've had a tough time being promoted because the preference is usually given to those who have tenure, who have been in the workforce significantly longer, aka baby boomers. So why should you care? Well, last year, the Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies found that more than half of Americans plan to work beyond the retirement age, 65, or not retire at all. It's a tough forecast for the younger generations. Are baby boomers blocking them from moving upward? Meanwhile, the cost of living is going up and student loan debt is skyrocketing. Are you okay, boomers?
Thanks for watching Hill TV on YouTube. Be sure to click subscribe and hit the bell so you know when we post new videos. And head to thehill.com for all the latest political news.